Equilibrium is a 2002 dystopian science fiction film written by director Kurt Wimmer. It stars Christian Scott Bale, Emily Watson, and Taye Diggs in a dictatorial government dominated by brutalist architecture rules a society where all emotion has been outlawed. The premise is that after World War III, people decided that human emotion was to blame for the violence. The solution proposed was the mandatory daily injection of a psychoactive drug, Prosium 2. The drug suppressed all emotion in the human brain. In addition, all materials, activities, or objects that elicit an emotional reaction were prohibited. Anyone who does is guilty of being a sense offense. They are arrested and executed. This story takes place in the city-states of Libya, where a totalitarian group called the Tetragrammaton Council rules without question. The council is led by a man called Father. Not everyone agrees with this type of society. There is a resistance to the government, who are dedicated to its overthrow and the return of human emotion. Special elite police were created by the Tetragrammaton Council to combat these rebels. These special police, called Tetragrammaton clerics, or just clerics for short, are given over-the-top movie-style training in martial arts and weapons training. The weapons training is the famous gun kata, or the more common name of gun fu, a pseudo-martial art that includes the use of guns in close combat. It features using guns as melee weapons, dual-wielding them, as well as firing without looking at the target. It was popularized in Hong Kong action movies before becoming popular in Hollywood. One high-ranking cleric, John Preston, accidentally destroys his daily dose of Prosium 2. This causes him to have emotions and memories of his wife, who was executed for being a sense offense. It also makes him more aware of his surroundings. He then proceeds to intentionally skip doses to feel more. At this point, he begins to build sympathies for the resistance. Eventually, he is discovered by his new trainee. After being hauled in to be investigated, he attacks the leadership, destroying it. At the same time, the rebels destroy the Prosium 2 manufacturing facility, sparking the beginning of the revolution. The premise is rather ridiculous. Emotion is not the cause of war. This is some nonsensical human nature argument. Wars happen for political and economic reasons. And to say that war simply happens because people just want to fight is nonsense. There's no multi-billion, hundreds of billions of dollars allocated to war just because people feel like it. Nobody leaves their family and relative security just to go off and fight in a war, and the best they can hope for is coming back in one piece, just simply because they just naturally do it. This is complete and utter nonsense. It's a fight between ruling classes that want control of resources and the ability to be able to make money off of those resources. War has always been about power and economics, although you could say politics and economics. It has been very long acknowledged that the average person has no real interest in war at all. It really doesn't benefit them in any way, shape, or form to really any significant degree, except with some few exceptions. You could make the argument that way far back in tribal days that one tribe may really want to go to war against another because that tribe had access to an area that had a much more abundant food, animals or plants, etc. And that was a matter of survival. You could make that argument then. But in a modern age where the actual ability to produce food is well over what we actually need to survive, you really can't. it really comes down to we do have enough resources for everyone. What we don't have is enough of an ability for everyone to make money off of it. We don't go to war just because it's human nature or some kind of nonsense argument like that. We go to war for political and economic reasons. And primarily, those are capitalism. This idea of blocking all emotion is basically nonsense. You're asking to do the impossible. There are numerous areas of the brain involved in producing and regulating emotion that you'd have to shut down whole sections of it, which would kill you. You have sections that produce it, and then more than one area that would regulate that emotion. The primary one being the limbic system. At least according to one paper, the entire cortical sheet, with the exception of area V1, projects to the striatum. Studies in the 1970s and 80s led to the concept of the cortical basal ganglia thalamocortical systems, or the cortical basal ganglia loops for short. This research attempted to map out the different parts of the cortex and are connected to different parts of the striatum, forming a series of possibly parallel functionally segregated circuits. It was found that striatal territories receiving cortical input do not directly reciprocate their connections, which instead return via different parts of the thalamus after an additional step in the pallidum, thus forming the loop. The idea of doing it with a pill is even more ludicrous. Just blocking one neurotransmitter for emotion would have an effect on several other systems, which is why prescription medication commercials come with a list of like 20 side effects. Even just serotonin alone, the basic mood neurotransmitter, just increasing that affects, not just your mood, but cognition, learning, memory. It also is linked to vomiting and vasoconstriction. And what are you going to do to stop that from basic emotion? Are you going to shut down your entire pulmonary endocrine cells? The lack of it is depression. So what do you do? Having it is a baseline. Not having it is depression. So do you block it from happening? Or does the pill put it out at a certain level in order to think? So you see what it is? To have it is to put it at a baseline. To not have it is to have an emotion. So you see what it is? To have it and not have it is also an emotion. So the idea of just simply taking a pill that would block all emotion is just, from a physical, chemical standpoint, it's just basically impossible. It's just completely nuts. There is somewhat of an example of this happening in real life. I do remember a case study from a while ago where a woman had a disorder where there was something damaged and she was incapable of feeling fear. Just straight up could not feel fear in any way, shape, or form. Nothing. And it was actually really quite a thing, and she could function just fine. She just was not able to actually fear anything. Was able to do some pretty far out stuff because she just wasn't afraid. And another problem with this is that how do you determine, what do you ban that elicits an emotional response? Because that whole thing can be completely subjective. In the movie, there's this whole thing where John Preston sees a sunrise from his window and it utterly astounds him. Yeah, that could be very emotional to someone, and to another person, it could not mean anything. The memory of his wife being taken away and killed, yeah, I can imagine that one would be very emotional. But again, all of this is still very subjective. How do you ban something like that? One piece of poetry to one person could be something that alters their life forever. You can hear a phrase or a piece of advice from somebody that elicits an emotional response that changes their lives forever. Then another person, they forget it in 20 or 30 seconds and it means nothing. So you ban the Mona Lisa. They use an example of that in the movie. Like, what? I mean, I look at the Mona Lisa and I see like a really great painting by someone with tremendous skill, but it doesn't elicit any emotional response. But in other people, it really does. So I think that the idea of just simply banning anything that elicits an emotional response is also nonsense because of the sheer subjective nature of what provokes an emotional response. It's just crazy. And in the end, let's just be really honest about it. I mean, despite the fact that I really, really like the film Equilibrium, I understand that it's no masterpiece. And the movie did not do very well financially. It only made a quarter of what it cost to actually produce. The the film itself, the idea is a very cheesy interpretation of 1984, warning us about the dangers of conformity and whatnot. It's a very almost an 80s ish action movie, but of a 1984 flavor. I'm saying that this would be the 1984 cheesiness version of an 80s action movie. Not that it is an 80s action movie. But having said that, I really do like the movie. I think it is fun to watch. I really enjoy it. I think that there is still a very serious warning that should be taken in there about, somebody coming in and blaming something ridiculous for the problems of society. Someone comes in, blames the immigrants. Somebody comes in and blames emotion. Somebody comes in and blames the religion that's not popular. V for Vendetta, aside from the whole Super Soldier V thing, was a much, much more realistic interpretation of something that could happen. I think it's far, far more realistic, something that's far more likely to actually happen. But sometimes that cheesiness is really something to be celebrated. And something that's just genuinely fun. Some artists have never shied away from that cheesiness and have embraced it, and it is a part of who they are. Like even Weird Al will admit that some of the stuff he does is cheesy, and people love him for it. It's what he does, and he's absolutely great at it. I love Weird Al. And I think that this is another example of this is the greatness of what you can do with that kind of cheesiness and actually do that cheesiness very well and still get a fairly good message across at the same time. So I think that a lot of people don't give the film Equilibrium enough credit. I think that a lot of people don't. Yeah, I think they don't give it enough credit as it is. I think a lot of people just write it off as just some stupid martial arts film, but I think it's actually a lot better than that.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.